What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On NBA, the biggest stories with the local experts. I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, also host of Locked On Rockets right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Today, we'll be chatting with David Ramil from Locked On Heat about why the Miami Heat have struggled compared to the success that they had last season, plus the uncertain future of veteran guard Kyle Lowry and whether or not he makes it past the trade deadline as a member of the Miami Heat. But first, today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Next game, how about Luka Doncic to score more than 26.5 points? What about LeBron James to have more than 7.5 rebounds? How about Giannis Antetokounmpo to have less than 6.5 assists? And what about Steph Curry to have more than 3.5 three-pointers made? So what is Prize Picks? It's daily fantasy sports, but how does it work? Basically, you pick 2 to 6 players. If they score more or less than their Prize Picks projection, you can win up to 25 times back on your money on any entry that you submit. There's no competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections available. Prize Picks offers projections on any sport that you watch. This includes NBA, NFL, MLB, NHL, PGA, college, you name it, they've got you covered over at Prize Picks. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that easy. They offer safe and very, very fast withdrawals, currently operational in over 30 states and Canada. Download the Prize Picks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code LOCKEDON. If you deposit $100, Prize Picks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, Prize Picks will give you $50. Don't forget to enter promo code LOCKEDON at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. Joining us now is David Ramil from Locked On Heat, who you can find wherever you listen to your podcasts. Just search Locked On Heat, as well as searching Locked On Heat on YouTube. David, the Miami Heat this season are in a very different spot than they were last season, right? I mean, you look at them now, they're 24-20, 7th seed in the Eastern Conference, a far cry from where they were last season. But when you look at the numbers, 23rd in offense, 8th in defense, slipping a little bit defensively from last year. They were 4th in defense, but then the offensive slippage, especially from 12th last season to 23rd this season. Let's start there. I mean, why have the Heat slipped so much offensively from last year to this year?
It's specifically the three-point shot. Last year, they were tops in the league and knocking it down. This year, not so much. They haven't gotten that kind of steady production, and it's kind of been inexplicable. It's not like it's a completely different cast of characters out there. They just haven't been able to shoot the ball as effectively. Max Strus has been in and out of the starting lineup. Caleb Martin's been okay as a three-point shooter. A lot of that falls on Kyle Lowry. He's been struggling for the three-point shot mightily, and I think he's been the biggest factor in that regard. Aside from that, no PJ Tucker. As you recall, he started off the season last year being tops in the league in three-point accuracy. This year, no Tucker, not the same level of three-point shooting as we had last year. And that's just been the tail of it, basically. Aside from that, nothing really changing in terms of their overall offense. They haven't changed personnel significantly. They haven't changed their way of attacking the basket or anything like that. They just haven't been able to knock down the three-point shot as easily as they did last year.
You know, I'm glad you bring up Kyle Lowry there because what's curious to me is the Heat this season are actually 7-1 without Lowry in the lineup. I mean, is it a stretch to say that the Heat might actually be playing better basketball without Kyle Lowry out there?
They play differently out there. And I think it's still a matter of when Lowry's out there, he's been struggling. And I'm not sure if it's because of age, although that's probably the main factor. He may be injured. We don't really get much in terms of updates from either Kyle, who's largely unavailable to media here in South Florida, and he is somewhat crusty about dealing with reporters. So that's just the reality of who he is, and the Heat PR hasn't been very open about whether or not he's dealing with anything. Of course, we know about personal issues that kept him in and out of the lineup last year. Those have cropped up this season as well. I'm not sure if you could go so far as to say they play better, but they do play differently. They attack the basket more. They have more speed, especially with the resurgence of Victor Oladipo, who I'm sure we'll talk about. Kyle, because he hasn't been knocking down the shot as well, and because he just can't get to the rim, he just does not have that superior burst at this point in his career, is just not very effective out there. So that's basically what it boils down to.
And I do want to talk about Oladipo, but I just while we're on the subject of Kyle Lowry, I mean, what is it? Does it feel like this Miami team is maybe at a crossroads with Kyle Lowry as far as his future is concerned? I mean, do you look at this as a deadline where Kyle Lowry could potentially be on the move? And if so, I mean, what type of return would this Miami Heat be looking? What type of return would the team be looking to get for Kyle Lowry at this deadline?
That's a great question, and one that I don't know we have a clear answer for, because there are incredible mitigating factors here. One, his age. One is his salary. One, his also relationship with Jimmy Butler, like they're close friends. And I don't know that you can risk another year wasting of Jimmy Butler's prime just to salvage that friendship and not hurt Kyle's feelings or hurt Jimmy's feelings. You have to get Butler's buy-in before you consider any kind of trade for Kyle Lowry. And it's not like he's been a bad Heat player. He just hasn't been a very good player. He's had his moments here and there, but he's just not particularly effective. So I'm not sure that you can trade Kyle Lowry. I'm sure a lot of Heat fans disagree in thinking that he's the priority in terms of what you want to trade. And as far as what you'd want back, probably a front court player to be a little bit more consistent. Caleb Martin has been good in that role. He's knocking down the three-point shot. He's tops on the team in that regard, but he's not a consistent four. He's just a little undersized. And while he's brought his own athleticism and flash to the position, he just doesn't have it to be as consistent at that role. So you'd want to have somebody that's a little bit taller, a little bit more useful when it comes to rebounding, but also plays well with Miami's overall defensive scheme, which is, to switch everything and playing alongside Bam Adebayo, who's somewhat undersized himself at the center position.
Now, Victor Oladipo, who is, I think, is a great story, and just, he's gone through so much trying to get back to the level that he was at, his pre-injury self. Over these last 10 games, he's averaging 14.8 points on solid efficiency, looking good. What are you seeing out of his play over this recent stretch?
He's been fantastic. The burst is back. He's moving laterally really, really well. The shot is still kind of a work in progress, the three-point shot in particular, just with everybody else on the team. He's just not knocking it down as regularly, but he has the confidence. Like, part of the struggle with Victor this season is whether or not he'd be willing to embrace the role coming off the bench. He's absolutely done that. He's leading Miami's bench. In last night's win over the Milwaukee Bucks, the Heat actually were able to sit Jimmy Butler for the entire fourth quarter as Oladipo and Bam Adebayo led their comeback and were able to kind of, put their boots on Milwaukee's throat and able to close out that game. And Oladipo was fantastic. The two-man game is really, really working well. He's been very, very good in terms of leading the offense. And some people think he might be a better starter than Lowry at this point, having him play the de facto point guard, dishing the ball out, etc. So we'll see if there's a change to the starting lineup. I'd prefer that he stay as a backup because I just think he's been a little bit more effective in that role. And you've got pretty good chemistry with the starters. They haven't been the problem. It's been the bench. And now all of a sudden you've got some more stability and certainly much more production with Victor coming off the bench and being really, really good. He's not quite to where he was, but as you well know, he was very, very good as an Indiana Pacer, obviously an all-star, but he's been the closest he's been since these string of injuries that have sapped so much of his athleticism over the last 3 years.
Yeah, and then kind of being in that reserve role, coming off the bench, maybe a little bit less pressure as well. You're playing against opposing second units. It just lends itself to a bit of an easier atmosphere for Victor Oladipo to try and continue to get back up to speed to the level of play that we know that he was at once before. Now, I feel like I may already have the answer to this, David, based on some of your previous answers. But, kind of going into this trade deadline, what are some of the biggest needs for this Miami Heat team?
Yeah, it's a
four shooting.
Yeah, shooting would be it. If you could find somebody, again, ideally you want somebody who's like a switchable big to play alongside Bam Adebayo, because I still think that's probably the best alternative or iteration of this team is to have somebody like that at the four, moving Caleb back off the bench and further solidifying the reserve unit. If you can get somebody like that, somebody to play kind of similar to what we got from PJ Tucker last year here in Miami, it could work. But then again, you might not be able to make any moves. And I keep telling Heat Nation that. I keep telling the fans they might not be able to make any moves because Miami just doesn't really have a lot of trade assets, which is why they couldn't consummate a deal for either Donovan Mitchell or Kevin Durant or anybody else this offseason. They may just wait to see if Jake Crowder gets bought out, bring him back to a system where he's familiar and plug him in at the four, move Caleb back to the bench, and then be closer to what the team was when they advanced all the way to the NBA Finals a couple seasons ago.
What does the future ultimately hold for Kyle Lowry? What moves, if any, will Miami make at this upcoming trade deadline? Of course, you have us covered for all of that and more over at Locked On Heat. David, I appreciate you stopping by Locked On NBA with me.
Absolutely, anytime.